And the House Government Operations Subcommittee on Legislation and National Security takes testimony on management of the Strategic Defense Initiative program. Among the witnesses is Lieutenant General James Abramson, who is director of the Strategic Defense Initiative organization.
Today, the subcommittee will receive testimony on the management of the Strategic Defense Initiative program. And 5 years ago, the President announced the SDI initiative, or Star Wars. At that time, we were told that SDI was intended to make nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete by eliminating the threat posed by strategic nuclear missiles. While this may be a laudable goal, the entire SDI program is highly controversial, involving many philosophical and technical issues. And the purpose of the hearing is not to question whether SDI is an achievable and desirable program that deserves public support. Rather, the focus will be on the adequacy of the program's internal management control systems. The importance of these systems cannot be overstated. Congress has already appropriated over $12 billion for SDI, and expectations are that the cost of the earliest part of the deployed strategic defense system could be as much as $150 billion. Of significance, as well, is the fact that a formal internal management control plan is just now being put into place. Over 3,000 contracts have been awarded absent such a plan. Also, a particular concern is the SDI organization's successful compliance with the 82 Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act statute initiated by Government Operations Committee in 1981. An effective internal management system is critical for an effort as large and diverse as SDI. Such a system is needed to produce reliable information, which the President and the Congress must have to make the hard decisions regarding the future course and funding of this program. It's also necessary for efficient program execution and for responsible congressional oversight. Testifying before the subcommittee today will be witnesses representing the GAO, the Department of Defense, Inspector General's Office, and the Director of the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Federal agencies throughout the government must maintain certain internal management controls, not just because it's a sound management practice, but because it's the law. When the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization became a separate agency at the Department of Defense in February of 1986, it inherited a lot of money and a lot of administrative and management requirements. This subcommittee has nothing to do with the money, but we have everything and jurisdiction over the internal financial and management controls. As one who's pushed hard for many of those controls, I have more than a passing interest in today's hearings. While I fully understand and respect the challenge of setting up an agency and making it responsive to its mission, I also expect any new agency in today's environment to quickly establish a sound internal control system. I'm anxious today to learn about internal control practices at the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. Is sufficient attention at SDIO being given to internal management controls? Is SDIO's internal management control program where it should be at this point in time? Those are the kind of questions that I'd like to pursue today. Those are the kind of questions that every agency head must answer. Mr. Chairman, I join you in welcoming our distinguished witnesses this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horton. Any comments? Mr. Conyers?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any opening statement.
We'll go with our first witness then is Harry R. Finley, the Senior Associate Director, National Security Internal Affairs Division of the U.S. General Accounting Office. Among other responsibilities, Mr. Finley's area includes review of the Strategic Defense Initiative within the Defense Department. He's accompanied by Homer Thompson, Group Director, and Emil Crocker, Evaluator. I want to thank you for joining us with us today. And Your entire statement will be placed in the record. We'd be pleased to hear your remarks at this time. Mr. Findley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today with Homer Thompson, Group Director, and Emil Crocker, Evaluator, to discuss management information and control issues associated with contracting for the Strategic Defense Initiative program. In our July 1986 report, we noted that the Strategic Defense Initiative organization had implemented the contract reporting system to provide essential contract data it needed. We also reported that the system lacked complete contract data, such as types of contractors and the extent of competition. As you requested, we recently updated that report and found that the concerns raised in our July 1986 report continue. SDIO stated that its contract reporting system is not used as a management tool for the SDI program, but to provide information. However, the lack of adequate data on contracts awarded to carry out the objectives of the SDI program hinders SDIO efforts to be responsive to the congressional needs for information to fulfill its oversight responsibilities. The contract reporting system contained information in more than $4.6 billion in fiscal year 1985 through 1987's funds obligated on contract awards. We found that the types of contractors that received contract awards totaling about $4.5 billion, or 98% of the obligated funds, were not identified. We also found that the extent of competition was not identified for contract awards totaling about $1.7 billion, or 37% of the obligated funds. SDIO has recently taken actions to more completely identify SDI-funded contract awards, including the types of contractors awarded SDI contracts and the extent of competition in the SDI program. In January '88, SDIO requested and obtained verbal approval from the Department of Defense's Washington Headquarters Service to add a specific code to identify SDI contract awards in DoD's DD-350 system. This system collects procurement information on all DoD prime contracts awarded above $25,000 and includes most of the essential contract data previously identified by SDIO for its contract reporting system. Although SDIO stated that its contract reporting system is not a management tool, it appears that the contract reporting weaknesses may be linked to a broader concern, which is SDIO's need to implement a formal internal management control program. In our report issued in November '87, we noted that SDIO needed to improve its ability to provide timely and effective management direction and oversight of the systems analysis and battle management program. SDIO has experienced several problems that result from inefficiencies in contracting and inadequate oversight relative to existing work directives. The problems, if uncorrected, could reduce SDIO's ability to provide needed information for an informed systems development decision planned for the early 1990s. We also reported that SDIO needed to implement a formal internal management control program. The absence of such a program has resulted in poor program documentation and limited dissemination of program information. The absence has also prevented managers from having reasonable assurance that the SDIO program will be adequately protected against fraud, waste, or mismanagement, and will be operated in accordance with the law. More specifically, we found some research efforts within the systems analysis and battle management program resulted in inefficiencies because contracts were terminated before intended work completed due to SDIO's inadequate direction and planning. In addition, we found that there was inadequate oversight relative to SDIO's management directives. About 47% of the total dollar value of the planned research during most of fiscal year 1986 was not covered by approved directives. Finally, SDIO's internal controls, as required by the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act, were deficient, and SDIO had not developed a formal internal management control program. In responding to our report, SDIO concurred with all the recommendations and informed us that it had completed some of the efforts or had plans to complete efforts to correct the problems we identified. This concludes my prepared testimony. At this time, I will respond to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finley and Mr. Thompson and Mr. Crocker. I have some few questions for you. Why is SDIO's contract information reporting system important to congressional oversight?
It should be considered important, Mr. Chairman, because the system was established to provide information to the Congress, to provide information to the Director SDIO, and others. Additionally, I know of no other system that aggregates contract data for SDIO in this fashion. Is it adequate? No. We looked at the system in '86 and found it inadequate. Our recent review for you found the inadequacies continue. The extent of competition is not identified 37% of the time. The types of contractors are not identified 98% of the time. However, as discussed in my testimony, the problems with the contract reporting system suggest a more serious concern, the need for an internal management control program.
Now, just what assurances were given to the GAO that an adequate contracting information reporting system would be put into place?
At the time of our '86 review and exiting with the SDIO, they advised us that at that time it was their plan to fix the system and to clean up all the data so that all the data, including the FY '85 data and beyond, would be okay.
Now, when did they tell you that?
1986.
And have they done it?
No, sir, they have not.
Would you please discuss the characteristics of a good internal management control system and the purpose of it?
Mr. Chairman,
just briefly, so we have for the record a good analysis of it.
A good internal management control program identifies various activities or units that are important to a program, determines which are most vulnerable, sensitive, or critical to the operation, and develops a plan that will review the status of these activities. The purpose of an effective internal management control program is to facilitate program execution, enhance management oversight, support external reviews, and protect against fraud, waste, and mismanagement.
Beyond the extent of competition and the type of business now contained in some contracts in the current system, what other type of information is available?
Contract numbers, type of contract, date awarded, contractor's name, address, executing organization, project title, and amount awarded.
Mr. Horton, do you have any?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In answer to the chairman's question, you explained what the internal management control program was. How long should it take to establish such a program by an agency?
Mr. Horton, I believe that would depend on the nature of a program.
Well, let's talk about SDIO. How long should it take them?
SDIO, it would probably take up to 2 years.
Where are they now?
SDIO, it is my understanding that they have just started to put a management control program in place. They hope to have it in place by the end of this fiscal year. However, more importantly is not having the control program in place, but having the systems in place and operational and reviewing the systems.
Why is this important, Mr. Finley?
I think that the best answer that I've heard recently for that was in your opening statement. It's important because it's required by the law and for those other things that I've mentioned.
Well, it's required by the law. Is it a good law? I mean, is there a reason for it? I mean, this is a very glamorous program. It gets a lot of attention, and why should they fool around with something like what you call management control? What's that all mean?
It gives managers and oversight folks reasonable assurances that the programs are being managed effectively and the stewardship of public funds are being carried out.
Is this a way to save some money? To watch how money is being spent?
It is certainly a way to watch our money and control our money, and yes, it is a way to save money.
And is it also a way to make certain that the program accomplishes what it's supposed to do?
Absolutely.
And so that those are really purposes of what that act's all about, isn't it?
That is correct.
At what point in time did the SDIO formally become subject to the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act, OMB Circular A123, and DOD Directive 5010.38?
Since SDIO was established formally in 1986, I believe that would be the time that it became subject to it. It was acting in an interim charter from April '84, I believe.
Did SDIO promptly initiate steps to establish a formal internal management control program once it became subject to the law, the circular, and the directive?
No, sir, they did not. It's my understanding that they started this program just last year.
Given its organizational history and the various requirements of the law, OMB circular, and the DOD directive, exactly where should SDIO be at this time?
Mr. Horton, that's difficult to answer, but I believe that they should have their management control program in place now. I believe that they've had enough time to do that.
We found when we had some hearings on the implementation of the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act back in 1986 that many of the agencies had problems with implementation. They were confused about definitions and concepts and were lacking in management commitments. And we found at that time that many of the agencies were not in full compliance, even though the act had been in place something like 3 years. Is SDIO experiencing the same type of difficulties other agencies experienced as a result of those hearings, or what we found out in those hearings?
Yes, I believe they are. I don't think that the GAO fault is that they're experiencing these difficulties. I think the GAO would have hoped that they would have started their preparation and their plan earlier.
What do you have to say about what they're doing now? Let's forgive them. They've been bad boys. They didn't do it for a couple of years, but now, are they on track? Are they really getting a handle on this management problem?
I would have to say that reading their recent plan, that the GAO is encouraged by the SDIO's efforts and hope that they will continue forward with it, and they should know that we would plan to look at it after a period of time.
Does that mean you pat them on the back? They're on the way?
Pat them on the back?
Well, I understand. We forgave them the first couple of 3 years, but now they're en route. Pat them on the back because they're moving forward.
The steps they are taking are encouraging, but
they're not there yet. Is that what you're saying?
They are not there yet, and we thought they were on the way with the contract reporting system in '86.
So you're not happy yet?
Well, I patted them on the back then, and I was wrong. So
so we're backing away again.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous to answer your question.
All
yes.
right. How many people do they have working full time on internal management?
At the time we completed our 80s.
Now? Yeah. Do you know?
I have no information on how many now.
Okay. What was the answer you're going to give me?
At the time we completed our 87 review, they had one person part-time.
That's all? How
Yes,
many
sir.
should they have?
I would just say that I believe because of the status of the program, that it's a new program, the fact that the Congress has given them some tens of billions of dollars, the fact that they would expect to spend $25 to $30 billion before their research program's over, more than one.
How many?
Can't hazard a guess.
Well, if you were running the program, how many would you want to accomplish all these directives and circulars and law?
Mr. Horton, I strongly prefer that you would ask General Abramson that question.
Well, he only thinks a part-time, one person part-time is sufficient. What do you think?
At least 3 to 6 of my best people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. And I wanted to make one comment, but in the 87 report to the Congress on the SDI, they point out in the program Genesis that in January of 1984, the SDI was established as a research and technological development program based on the recommendation of the Fletcher study. In April 1984, the SDIO was formally chartered as a defense agency to manage the DOD's efforts. So it goes without saying that they've had a good solid 4 years to plan how they're going to spend it, and instead they've been just spending $12 billion without much of a plan. Is that the genesis of your comment?
They certainly do not have the plan required by the DOD directive, the OMB circular, and the 1982
Do you think that
law.
would have had a high priority if you were spending $12 billion? If I told you, Harry R. Finley, I want you to go spend $12 billion lollygagging all over the United States, spending that money, build a couple of new think tanks on the road to the Dulles Airport. You know, keep building up that junk. Would you at least have a plan before you started throwing that money away?
Certainly, if I knew this chairman was going to have a subcommittee hearing on it. Absolutely.
So you're a good
Absolutely.
All right. I don't think they worry about that a damn bit. All right. Mr. Conyers.
Chairman,
Gentleman
thank you.
from Michigan.
I'd like to find out if you can tell me, Mr. Finley, what the reason was is that they lacked contract data in the system, that we couldn't identify who the types of contractors were.
The data was not in the system because the executing agencies did not submit it. The SDIO was organized to be centrally managed, but the program to be the execution left to 5 agencies. They simply did not submit the data, and even though they received encouragement to do so, they still don't.
So it's still not coming in, the identification of who the contractors are?
No, but SDIO in January of this year has decided to go to a new system. They're going to essentially obtain data from the ongoing DD-350 system, a DOD system, by putting in an SDI identifier. They're hoping that by doing this, by next fiscal year, they'll be able to run both systems concurrently and then switch to the new system.
Well, now, what does the failure to comply with the laws and the circulars in terms of the program management have on the overall goal of creating SDI?
One difficulty is, and I believe one reason for putting the law in place, is that programs should be judged on the merits of the program and not on the ability to manage them. In other words, not on management deficiencies.
Well, where does that leave us then? We don't want to separate. I mean, if you're not managing it properly, how can we determine if the goals are going to be reached or if they're being proceeded toward in a reasonable manner? In other words, what I'm saying is if there's bad management, how can we expect to accomplish our goal?
The goals, excuse me, the law was put in place to give us assurances that the programs were being managed appropriately. And without it, I do not believe that you have such assurances.
Right, and without those assurances, we can't be confident that we're moving toward the overall objective either.
Yes, sir.
I think that's about all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conyers. I note in your report, which you filed in November of '87, a very concise sentence that said that I note in your report of 1987, in a concise sentence, you state that DOD's FMFIA reports to the President and the Congress for fiscal years 84, 85, and 86 failed to mention that the SDIO did not have an IMC program, and the lack of adequate documentation and the inattention to IMC standards are material weaknesses that would likely have been found by DOD and identified in DOD's FMFIA report if an IMC program had been in effect. I thought that was a good sentence, and I thought it concisely put just what the problem is. And I want to, Mr. Walker and Mr. Lukens from Ohio are here, and they've been very interested in these SDI programs. They both spent a lot of time there. And if you all had any comments to make on this, if not, we're delighted to have you here. And we thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask
Mr. Horton.
I noticed in the final report of the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, they made an inspection of the SDIO, and in their report, which was from September 28 to October 16, they lauded the SDIO and said the SDIO staff was using many creative management techniques to resolve problems within the program. Have you gone over that Inspector General's report?
No, sir, Mr. Horton, I have not received a copy of it.
You haven't? You mean this was after your
I think
study?
that must have been released. Do you have a release date on that?
Let's see. Yeah, it was just released March 24.
No, sir, I have not received that.
Well, that would appear to be a little inconsistent with your statement, and I was just curious. Perhaps you might get a copy of that and give us an update.
They lie.
Be pleased to.
Thank you very much.
They just work both sides. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for coming down. We appreciate your objective analysis of this program, and hope that you will continue your keen efforts to see that $12 billion, which may escalate to 25 or to 50 or to 150 billion before it's over with, finally has a program for spending it that's workable. I note in their 88 statement of March, here's one of their confidence. Where's that statement right here? No, the one I just looked at, the 88 one. Let me look at that. 88.
87.
March 24, 88. Is that it? Where's the one you had there, Frank? Which one? Oh, March 24, 88.
Just got it this morning.
Yeah, that's right. I had one statement in here that I know you'll enjoy. Here's a sentence here that really warms your heart, makes you know that the Defense Department is spending your tax money wisely, carefully, confidently. They say that the SDIO, this is their document, was accomplishing its mission in a highly effective manner, subject to the findings presented in this report. And one of the findings was that, of course, the SDI program acquisition strategy required to accomplish the transition from the research phase to the demonstration/validation phase has not been fully delineated. But it's all there in their mind. That ought to make you feel better as you go to bed tonight. You'll know that they're thinking about it. They haven't done much about it, but they're thinking about it now, Finley. We enjoyed having you all, and thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, our next witness is Derek J. Vandershaft, Deputy Inspector General of the Department of Defense. And we welcome you to the hearing, sir. And your entire statement will be placed in the record in its entirety. And you're now recognized for your oral presentation.
He's been here.
Yeah, old Vandershaft been here forever. How long have you been testifying for this committee, Vandershaft?
Oh, about 6 years, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'll
Mr.
try to
Chairman, he's
straighten
done an
out.
excellent job.
I notice you've already been critical of our latest inspection of
Objective.
the SDI. Well,
Objectively analyzed.
objectively critical.
From your statement in your document of
It's our
March
document. I think you'll
24.
find a lot of items of
88.
interest to the committee in that document. But overall, in that summary statement you read, I have to stay with that statement that the organization reflects high morale and is trying to do a job, having to work around and sometimes develop systems on its own, if you will, in order to manage the many contracts that they have to manage. But
I want to join the chairman in welcoming you, and it's true you've been here many times. I remember the first time you were here, which was shortly after the office was established, and there was a whole row of admirals and generals in the second row, and your testimony was not very favorably accepted by them, but you had the intestinal fortitude to say exactly what you had found, and I was very impressed, as I think this subcommittee was, and
thank you. Well,
we
thank you.
appreciate the
I'll
job
try to
you're
do the
doing.
same.
ground down by the process.
I'm not being ground down. I'll
still
try to do
having
the
steak
same,
tartar for
the same here today. And
He looks mean.
we worked hard to make that report available to so this committee could have access to it at a time. We wanted to be sure that everything in there is accurate and complete, and we made it available to the committee yesterday. Anyway, let me proceed with my statement briefly, maybe make some summary points here. Obviously, the Office of Inspector General is very much involved in the internal management control program within the entire Department of Defense, and we have paid recently particular attention to the program as it's been implemented within the SDIO organization. We want to help ensure through inspections, audits, and that the DoD components establish and maintain adequate systems of internal management controls. Our record in this area, I think, has been very good. We have sought in the past, and we will continue to seek ways to enhance and strengthen the internal management control process throughout the department. For example, our investigators developed a series of educational briefings in fraud and integrity awareness that are regularly presented to DoD components throughout the world. Our audit elements base their work on identification and evaluation of management controls in each audit area. And finally, our inspections in the DoD agencies and field activities include reviews of the internal management control program implementation. The reviews evaluate the established systems, analyze potential vulnerabilities, and where necessary, suggest improvements to broaden application or strengthen existing management systems. I would like to note, Mr. Chairman, that many of the control weaknesses reported by the Department are in fact detected by inspections and audits that my organization or our organization has done. Now, with respect to the inspection of the SDIO organization, I want to point out that we focused on management of SDIO, not on the SDIO program. So you shouldn't draw conclusions from necessarily what we found about SDIO, the organization itself, with respect to the entire program. I think you have to be careful when you make those leaps from the individual management, if you will, of the office itself to the large decentralized program that is being implemented throughout the Department of Defense and other agencies of the government, and along with many contractors who are involved in the process. Now, the objective of our inspection was to assess the organization's efficiency of its management, the effectiveness of its operations, and compliance with applicable laws and DoD policies. The inspection concentrated primarily on a review of procurement, financial management, automated data processing, personnel management, internal management controls, and the overall morale of the organization. And we made two overall general observations, and the Chairman has made reference to one of those observations already, that the SDIO was accomplishing its signed mission in a highly effective manner, and that considering the uncertainty of funding, the centralized planning with decentralized program execution that's involved in this program, and the personal staffing restraints that have been placed on the SDIO. Also, we found that the SDIO organization, or our team, I should say, was favorably impressed with the drive, initiative, dedication of the SDIO staff. Their morale was high in spite of long hours, tight time frames, frequent travel, and numerous meetings. Now, since February 1986, when it was chartered as a defense agency, the SDIO has made significant progress in establishing a formal internal management control program. Now, they got a late start, and despite their late start, the SDIO has completed all of the internal management control actions that were required for fiscal year 1987 because the DoD directive allows the flexibility to begin evaluating areas of high risk during the second year of the program. In fact, the General Accounting Office witness before me so indicated that 2 years were necessary to put one of these programs into effect. And I think they'll be into their second year now, and by the end of this fiscal year, hopefully they will have completed all the steps. In my statement, I indicate the additional steps that SDIO has to complete in order to have a fully effective up and operating program. Now, they did submit a 5-year management control plan and an annual statement of assurance to the Assistant Secretary of Defense Comptroller, which was incorporated in the Secretary of Defense's statement last November. In that statement, SDIO reported 3 material control weaknesses within the organization. I have to emphasize that those same 3 material control weaknesses appeared in our inspection and were in fact identified in our inspection. We also identified in our inspection a number of other control weaknesses. I think they're of less significant nature, but they're still important. Now, on page 6 of my statement, I list the 3 that the SDIO organization identified. Maybe I can briefly mention those, and I listed 4 or so others that we feel are also indications of an internal control weakness that need to be corrected. The 3 that the SDIO organization listed was the Information Resources Management function not being organized nor structured in accordance with DoD policy and directives. This contributed to an SDIO management information system that was fragmented, uncoordinated, and lacked integration. Tasking and administration, the second one, tasking and administration of management support contracts issued and administered by SDIO required strengthening. And the third material control weakness, deficiencies existed with the administrative management of intermittent consultants. Then I list on page 5 or 6 of my statement and 7 4 others which we think are important but of a lesser nature. One deals with the failure to use the cost schedule control system criteria, which is a management system employed for the management of contracts to relate the time and money spent on a contract and tie the 2 together to make sure that the contract and the work is moving along according to plan. The other one deals with ensuring that members who are advisory committee members to the SDIO office have met all the standards of conduct requirements and filed all the proper financial disclosures, gained the proper security clearances, and records of those documents are on file. Another weakness dealt with in developing procedures to ensure that they received valid expenditure data on contracts that cited SDIO funds in order to meet its SDI program oversight responsibilities. And finally, there were a number of detailed administrative instructions that had to be issued. In fact, during our inspection, the SDIO office issued about 15 of these administrative instructions, and I believe since then has taken action to issue even more. And I think they're catching up with that process. Finally, our report has 6 or so other items that we considered of concern, and someone could say they may represent material control weaknesses. I don't think they're of a material nature. I think they can, in fact, be fixed and rectified, and I believe the organization is moving out to fix some of those problems. Now, we will follow up with that inspection with a follow-on inspection later on, and we will also send the auditors in to make sure that the internal management control process is up and running and the information that's reported to the Secretary of Defense and to the Congress is complete and accurate when they have to report again at the end of this fiscal year. That about completes the information I had in my statement, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to try to answer your questions.
Well, I don't know if you've been eating steak tartar every morning. You might have missed a few mornings, I'm afraid, Mr. Anderson. What prompted the IG's 87 inspection of the SDIO?
We found out from some of the information obtained from the General Accounting Office that a formal program had not been implemented in the organization, and we immediately took steps to find out why not and what had happened. In fact, we moved up our inspection, which had been scheduled for late fiscal year 1988. We first got word of this in the spring of '87 that the General Accounting Office had identified the failure to institute a formal program. We started doing our homework that spring and summer and went in and inspected in the fall, in September-October time frame last fall.
Did your 1987 inspection indicate that an adequate internal management control system was in place at the SDIO?
No, it didn't state that the system was fully adequate yet, but they did accomplish what they had to accomplish in 1987. They did get a late start. They didn't identify until actually May of 1986 that they had to put such a program, a formal program in place. And they got a late start. They filed a plan in '86 and went ahead and did the management control process in '87, but were unable to complete it in time to make the report. And now they're working on putting the rest of the process together and having a formal program ready this year.
When do you think they'll finish it?
I'm almost certain they'll finish this year. I don't think there's any doubt about it. They've devoted some additional people to it. You asked the question earlier, how many people were involved in this. I want to tell you, first of all, it isn't necessarily a question of how many people you put on this. It's got to be inculcated into the management process. Managers up and down the line have got to be involved in this program, or you can devote lots of people to the paper aspects of it, and you won't be successful. If they have, but you do need a certain amount of people really dedicated to it, and they do have now 3 part-time personnel in the Controller's office who work internal management control issues, audit follow-up issues, and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Why is it important to develop an adequate management information system for SDI? Why do you need one?
Well, it's critically important because the SDI has to, the way it's organized first, it's central management and central planning, if you will, but very much decentralized execution. And when you go to that kind of an organizational approach, you need information, or you can hardly manage without information, and you need accurate and timely information. And that's one of the weaknesses that we identified, and the GAO has also identified that weakness. That's why a program is quite critical for them, because it will spot shortcomings in their information systems.
Now, is such a system now in place at the SDIO?
Well, yes, such a system is in place. Yes, the system is in place in the sense it wasn't complete. Are you talking about the management information system? Oh, no, the management information system itself is not adequate yet. Oh, okay. I thought you were back on the internal management control process as opposed to the system. Excuse me.
And it's not in place
It
now.
is not adequate in our opinion.
It's under a 5-year program?
I don't know for sure if it's a 5-year program. They have developed a plan and a program to get there. It's detailed in our inspection report to some extent. I would hope that they can get there in somewhat sooner than 5 years. They certainly cannot rely solely on, and they are not either, rely on the DD-350 system for management data on their contracts. They have got to have systems that go well beyond the DD-350 approach in my view, from my viewpoint anyway.
On 16 November of '87, Gordon Smith pointed out that the present information resources management function is not organized or structured in accordance with DoD policy and directives which contributed to SDIO management information system that is fragmented, uncoordinated, and lacks integration.
Yes, sir.
Which seems to indicate that they realize that they just haven't done it. It's just a mess.
Well, I wouldn't
And
say
you
they
think
haven't.
now that they are working at it?
Yes, I wouldn't say they haven't done anything. They've got like 40 different elements they're trying to integrate to manage the program better and to bring their work package directive information system along so they can really and truly get the directions that they want the executing agencies to carry out, and they get updated real-time sort of reports from these executing agencies on the status of their contracts. They need to work very hard on this. I think they are attempting to do so, and I don't know no reason why they shouldn't be successful.
It's going to make further uncertain the funding of this kind of an operation.
What was that, Mr. Chairman?
It complicates the funding.
Yes,
Not in this committee, but just you get less support for funding these billions of dollars if they're not spending them very carefully. That's the problem.
And I think they realize that. I think General Abramson will speak to
It
that.
doesn't keep them awake at night, though, does it?
I hope it keeps them awake occasionally.
Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have an act, the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act. We have an OMB Circular A123 and a DOD Directive 5010.38. They're all designed to require this internal management control program. Isn't that accurate?
That's correct.
I mean, they're all aimed at the same thing.
They're all steps in that they all steps in that process, from the law down to the detailed implementation directive, the DOD directive.
And as the Inspector General for the or the deputy, or your office as the Inspector General for the Department of Defense, you're very much interested in making certain that the different organizations in the DOD comply with that law, circular, and directive.
Absolutely, we are. And one of the problems, and I in some ways feel responsible for it, we kind of let it slip through. We should have picked it up in 1985, if not in 1984. They were, at that point, were not a defense agency. They were within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. They did not have a charter as a defense agency.
Well, now,
we thought they had a process, and were reporting that process in through the OSD report, if you will. But they still had to have a process, and they hadn't come far enough along with their process until that was picked up in about May of 1986. Then they got with it and are, have since then worked, diligently to put an adequate internal control process into effect.
And your analysis of that at the present time is that it's not in place yet.
The information management piece that they need to manage their information is not in place. The process, if you will, to find out what are the critical the vulnerabilities the agency have, what are the risks, are they high, low, or medium, that process is in place, and they've identified their information management system as either a medium or a high-risk kind of element that they have to correct and fix.
Are you convinced that the leadership in that SDIO is committed to the law, circular, and directive?
Yes, sir.
You don't have any question about that?
I have no question about that. I think they had to have their attention brought to it, and a kind of hearing like this helps. But I don't think this hearing was necessary. I think they made that commitment when we went in there last late summer and fall and explained and showed and identified some of the weaknesses that were there, and said, here's what you've got to do to bring this thing along. And they said, they saluted and said, yes, sir, IG, we think you're probably right about this. We're going to do it. And they've been very positive since.
And I don't know whether you answered this or not. Maybe you did. But how long do you think it will be before they are fully in place with a system and
by the end of this fiscal year, they should have the system that's required in the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act in place. I don't think they will have an adequate information system for 2-3 years. I don't know. I suggest.
Why do you think that?
Because it's
what's the problem there?
There's so many players and so much information that has to be put together in order to do it. They're contracting with literally they have 800 or 900 active contracts. I don't know how many different firms are involved with subcontractors and everything else. They're doing this through each one of the military services, through the Advanced Research Project Agency, through the Defense Nuclear Agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
But the controls are important. But the controls are important, are they not?
Those controls are yes, they are important, and I think
isn't that, and shouldn't that be a very high priority?
Absolutely, and I think it is a high priority.
But when you talk in terms, I mean, I can understand some agencies that don't have the high visibility and have the size budget that this agency has, perhaps not getting online in 5 years, but it would seem to me with the amount of money involved and the high visibility that this agency would have to make a very special effort to get that to get online so that they've got better controls and better information.
What they've done is they've used a lot of alternate workarounds, if you will. One of the things they've attempted to do is ask each of their contractors to report on a monthly basis the amount of money the contractor has really committed themselves to. So if the contract were terminated tomorrow, what would the government bear in terms of additional costs that may not already have been identified as being obligated, but certainly have been committed to the program because the information that they're getting is not adequate. They've also taken steps to fix their main program, their Work Products Directive process, and bring it up and fix it much sooner than 2 or 3 years. I understand, and they're busily working to have that done in about a year, but General Abramson can correct me on that aspect of it. Whether or not they'll be able to do that in view of all the agencies and all the executive organizations that are involved in managing the details of SDI contracts, I'm not certain of that. We'll have to go back and see how they're doing in a year or two.
Well, one of the points that was brought up in the GAO report, and I don't know, I assume you folks went over that.
No, I've read both of their reports. Part of the difficulty here, and let me comment on the GAO report. The GAO has done like 30+ surveys of the SDIO program. Well, GAO was constantly in on the program, so the DoD IG, by law, is told, make sure that we coordinate our audits and make sure we don't duplicate our functions, etc. So we saw the continual GAO review process going on, and every year when we'd go through our planning process in the IG's office, we would say, we're not going to put a lot of resources in SDIO. We've got other things to follow up on because the General Accounting Office is in there with a large audit effort. We've been involved in SDIO in about 4 or 5 different ways. The principal one has been this inspection, but we've touched on their work with some of our other audits, and I have 2 ongoing audits now, one on the endo-atmospheric non-nuclear kill vehicle and one on the airborne optical adjunct program. There's about 4 other programs or major programs within SDIO that we want to hit. But I don't want to duplicate what the General Accounting Office is doing, Mr. Horton. And that's where, had we not been so concerned about that, we might have picked up the fact that they hadn't put this formal internal management control process into effect earlier, and we may have been able to get them started in this process in 1985 rather than 1986.
Well, I'm concerned about the urgency of the problem, and one of the things that was pointed out to me in the GAO report was that in Griffiths Air Force Base up in Rome, New York, which is right next to my district. Actually, Rome and the base is not in my district, but most of the people that work there live in my district in the little towns of Camden, Lee, and Western. And the Rome Air Development Center was mentioned, and there were some contracts that were let there, and then they terminated those contracts after 2 or 3 days. And then the report went on to indicate that SDIO was forced to reduce or eliminate some of the lower priority BMC3 technology development and so forth. The GAO found this to be somewhat inefficient way to operate. It was concluded it was an indictment of their internal control system. What I'm concerned about is we don't want that type of thing to be happening. And their control system is going to be very important to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen.
I agree. We don't want that kind of thing to happen very often, but it's going to happen from time to time in this program, from my viewpoint. And General Abramson can talk to it, I'm sure, in more detail. You got 2 factors that are involved. One, they're coming in with a program, and generally they haven't been coming, with a budget request to the Congress, an appropriation request that comes back considerably smaller than the request that they have made, and that has to cause them to have to adjust their programs. And when they see that,
I understand those kind
they have
of things.
to do that quickly. The other thing is they're going up a lot of high-tech area roads, if you will. Some of those roads are going to lead to dead ends, And as soon as they identify those dead ends, they ought to cut them off and stop. So
Well, I
think
understand that, but what I'm saying is, and I think you agree with me, that there is a need for controls. Probably in this agency more than any other agency because of their high visibility and because of the amount of money that they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
In other words, they probably ought to, as I said earlier, put a high priority on control and information, much more so than any other agency. And so what I'm trying to get across is that it seems to me that there's an urgency that they get these systems in place before 5 years and have it done just almost yesterday, if you can.
I agree completely. I think some of the examples you show, and I think the GAO treated those in its report, were in fact mistakes. They probably should have never been awarded in the first place, or one of the executive agencies decided to terminate the contract. Another thing the SDI people have to be aware of and got to be very careful and look for is that their money that they are providing in a general sense within an overall program is in fact spent the way they want it spent. That when you get down to the detailed projects and tasks within the sub-program, if you will, that the executive agent doesn't decide to take on his own, have his own agenda, if you will, and decide to do work that maybe is not of that much importance to the SDI operation, but is an importance to this or that command within one of the three services and so forth. For that very reason, General Abramson needs good information. And I just wholeheartily agree with you, Mr. Horton.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Conyers, the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I can think of, Mr. Vanderschaft, to wonder about is that it took DODIG so long to get onto this and report it to the President and the Congress. You have a pretty good track record before this committee. I don't know if this was in your shop. It probably was, but the fact of the matter is that somehow the internal management control plan didn't really get your attention until very, very recently, and I think you've told us what that complements GAO.
But that's part of the reason we didn't discover it sooner, because of the GAO providing a lot of detailed coverage of the SDI program. And it wasn't until GAO determined they did not have an adequate program that we first learned of it. Maybe we should have been more aware of it. I'll take responsibility for that. But believe me, as soon as we were made aware of it, we moved up an inspection a year ahead of what we had planned to do it and got in and said, this is an important matter, and tried to provide as much assistance to the organization as we could to help them identify their problems and fix their problems. You can't come down only just hammering organizations and telling them what's wrong. You also got to help them and assist them in finding what's wrong, but then fixing it. And we intend to go back again in a year or so and see that they've done right, and in the meantime to do the best we can to assist in that process.
Well, I think this hearing is right on time, and I think we'll have to have another one somewhere in the beginning of next year, middle of next year at the latest, to find out if all these promises have been kept. You know, this isn't the first time they promised to make some corrections that didn't happen. So it looks like we're going to have to watch this much more carefully to see what the problem is. I don't understand why they wouldn't just report the contractors that were doing the work. That seemed to be a computer operation, literally, if everything is on the up and up. We find that consultants were carried long after their appointments had expired. Those are things that create a lot of lack of confidence in the Congress, and it seems to me that with the program being as controversial as it is, a failure of good management systems could really tear this thing apart. And I'm hoping that we'll make sure that these corrections occur and that all of the promises that are being made are kept.
I have the same expectations and the same hopes, and I'm sure that those problems can be fixed. In fact, some of those that you mentioned are not as large or voluminous as they may sound. We identified the consultant one you mentioned, and I've done some more work on it, and it turns out to be nothing. In fact, the problem is not within the SDIO office on that. It happens to be within the Washington headquarters service, and it's a bigger problem. So we're going to go look at the bigger problem, not the SDIO problem. So you got to keep the things in perspective, and when you look at the perspective of the SDIO organization, I think they're dedicated, well-motivated people that are trying to get the job done.
Well, yeah, they're also making promises that haven't been kept. I'm not doubting how dedicated they are, but look, we'll be following this closely because $12 billion is just a lot of money to be running around without a management control plan that everybody can agree on.
Well, I make one other point about the $12 billion. Remember, the executing agencies do have management control plans up and down the line. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is covered by the same law, the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act. The systems commands of the Air Force, and Mr. Horton mentioned a subcommand of one of the Air Force's systems command in Rome, New York. They all work the internal management control process up and down the line.
Well, there may be a lot of smaller management control programs, but the major one for SDIO is the one that we're here about
and
today.
That's the one you absolutely.
There may have been some good ones, and I don't doubt that, but the overall, the one that controls the 12B comes from that plan that we're here today to talk about. I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench into each and every one of them. We haven't had that time to go into that kind of detail, and I don't think we would try to criticize it in that way recklessly. But $12 billion starting off without the master internal management control plan intact, really, I think is going to drop as some pretty bad news in the Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers, very much. I want to make one other thing on your checklist. You ought to look at this wonderful report that you all put out. You're familiar with it?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Well, there's one little item there in 14. Keep it on your checklist. They don't have a contingency plan for backup in case of disruption of the operations. They lose all the files and all that, go to hell if the power goes off. And they ought to find another computer that they can dump that in on and have a backup.
We identified it, Mr. Chairman, and there it is.
Yeah, but you told me that. Don't say so in here.
What?
In this report, you still say you're looking for one.
Well, I know, but we identified that it's a problem. And
Since yesterday?
No, we identified that last fall. Now, I don't know where they stand. We haven't been back in there since last fall. I assume General Abramson is working on obtaining a backup a processor, but I would recommend he put his priority on getting his program, the first program, fixed up first. He's in the Pentagon. The danger of everything being knocked out there is somewhat remote. If it's really knocked out there, it might be what I mean, totally knocked out in the sense that a nuclear weapon or something of that sort. And in that case, a backup computer located in the area wouldn't do him any good either. So first of all, he got to put his highest priority on his first computer. Then he can worry about his backup computer, and that's why I didn't emphasize that to the committee.
Well, we thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our last witness is Lieutenant General James A. Abramson. He's Director of the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, responsible for managing and directing research and development programs in support of the Strategic Defense Initiative. He's accompanied by his Deputy Director, Gordon Smith. Gentlemen, we welcome you to the hearings, and we will put your statement in the record. And you can summarize your remarks at this time and proceed as you see fit. General, we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to be here, and frankly, I'm pleased to try to correct what I think is a very incorrect implication that is being drawn both by the GAO witnesses and, in some cases, by a misinterpretation of the information in terms of what the program is about or the way we're controlling it. And I'd like to start with what the essence of management controls really are and what we need and what we started out to do right from the very beginning. When we started this program, we had something like 11 people, and that's what I had in the very beginning. And our job was to, in fact, carry out the President's program and to research many different avenues of technology, and then to choose from those avenues of technology as quickly as possible and choose the ones that would be the most cost-effective and had the most promise to go ahead with, and to research those even further, and then finally to integrate those into a system someday so that after there is a national decision, then we can go into final development and deployment of a program. The most important elements of a management control system, first of all, are to choose what technologies to follow up, what technologies to put your money into, and secondly, to find a responsible means of contracting for that effort, conducting that effort in a national laboratory where that's appropriate, and to ensure that the essence of the Financial Integrity Act is met, but more than even just the essence of that, that we are carrying out responsible controls on the program, and I move very quickly to do both of those activities. Now, there is an implication that perhaps because there are some computer elements that are not in place so that a group can come in from the outside and say very quickly, can you show me a listing of all of these particular controls, that the program is not controlled, and that's the wrong conclusion to draw. First of all, right from the very beginning, the concept was that the majority of the contracting, the majority of the research, all of that would be carried out in these other agencies. And Mr. Vanderschaft explained that. Those agencies do have the requirements to have a system which operates under the Federal Integrity Act, and they do. And we relied on that for all of those programs. So the implication that we do not have and didn't have right from the beginning an adequate protection for the very large majority of the funds is a wrong implication to draw. Where we had to do contracting for our centralized SDIO organization, we initially used the Washington Headquarters Service, and they have the same requirements as everybody else, and in fact that was there and available, and we relied and checked on that. Now, the next step was there proper technical direction that was given to each of these agencies? And by the way, was there a plan, and was that plan available not only to our people and to the agents, but to the Congress? And yes, we delivered those plans. In fact, within, I believe it was about 4 months, we delivered plans to the Congress in directed energy in each of the fundamental areas of how we were going to proceed. There has been an annual congressional report that lays out quite specifically what our hoped-for technical program would be, and as we were underfunded substantially each year, we also came back then with the adjustments. Now, some of those adjustments are painful and difficult, and that takes time, and in some cases it resulted in termination of lower priority contracts just perhaps within days after they happened. But the decision process was a decision process of priorities. Now, if I may, I'd like to indicate how one indeed ensures that the technical direction is there and available. And that's by having some of the top technical managers in the country who are interfacing directly and personally into each one of those projects. Now, I have a write-up, and if I could ask Mr. Gardapi to deliver that. Okay. It is a handout on one of the programs, the Boost Surveillance and Tracking System. And what you will see is that my managers, and in some cases myself, some cases Dr. Gordon Smith, and others, started and were intimately involved with that Air Force managed program. Now, in what ways? We approved the acquisition strategy. We participated in their source evaluations. We participated in contractor meetings where those meetings, in fact, laid out what their progress was, what their problems were. The Air Force team, now remember Mr. Vanderschaft's point that CSC is an important tool that ought to be used. The Air Force team used the CSCS system to evaluate that contractor and its progress every day. I just didn't get all of those delivered to my office and consistently and carefully looked at. And there were reasons for that. One, I thought that level of management was improper, particularly when my people know what was going on because they were there and working with those contractor teams and with those government teams. In some cases...
What you're saying that you should not be included under the law, the directive?
No,
because
absolutely.
These programs are farmed out, so to speak?
No, sir. I don't want you to get that impression. What I am trying to get across is that the law is implemented in all of the agencies. And since the vast majority of the activity is carried out in those agencies and is properly supervised under us, the implication that the program is not being conducted and in fact carefully evaluated under all the requirements of the law is an improper implication. Now, as the SDIO, my organization moved into contracting itself, primarily because the Washington Headquarters Service did not have people who were used to this high technology kind of work, then it became incumbent on me to establish a portion of control for my activity. And in fact, we have been working on that.
Well, even before that, it was incumbent on you to have that because you were subject to the law, the circular, and the directive.
It was incumbent on me to, in fact, ensure that it was carried out, and it was carried out. It was carried out in the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy, the places where my contractors are implemented. For example, if the Air Force is writing a contract on that particular satellite program, I shouldn't also write a contract on that program. And the reason is because I have my people checking to see that they are writing that contract in accordance with the law, that they have the accounting systems and the things to make it work.
Who gets the money?
I get the money, and my people ensure that that element of the law is carried out. And I think that's important.
Well, if you get the money,
out.
If you get the money, you parcel out the money, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's why it's important for you to comply with the Integrity Act and with the circular and the directive.
I understand that. What I am trying to get across is that there is an implication that the program is not being conducted in such a
nobody
way.
said that.
And it was.
No, nobody said that. I mean, we acknowledge that there are certain parts of your operation that are, if you will, contracted out. They're performed by the Air Force. You contract them out, but you get the money. And what we're saying is that your agency is subject to the law, the circular, and the directive.
Right.
And so what people have been talking about here this morning is that your agency has not put in place, even as of the moment that we're talking now, the necessary ingredients to comply. And as a matter of fact, the Inspector General's office just said it's going to take you 5 years, and you heard my concern that it ought not to take 5 years, and I hope that that'll be an inspiration to you to move even quicker to put that in place, because apparently it isn't in place yet. Is it in place?
It is mostly in place. There are some things that need to be corrected, and the Inspector General's office identified some of those things that should be improved, and we're working very hard, and
I think it would be helpful to us for you to explain to us what is in place,
Yes,
how much remains to be done, and when you're going to get there. I mean, that would be very helpful to us.
I believe that we outlined that there are, in fact, only 3 weaknesses that we consider to be material weaknesses. Those particular weaknesses have to do, and they were identified in the Inspector General report, and we should have them within, I believe, the next 6 months or so, completely resolved. And by the way, we will present that plan to Mr. Vanderschaft and his people so that they can validate that they are corrected. That does not mean that we don't have most of our plan in place. We do.
Well, now, he said 5 years. He said it's going to be 5 years.
5 years.
I just want to find out from you what your position is with regard to the 5-year goal.
I believe that Mr. Vanderschaft's comment was on a full information reporting system, a management information system. And that's a very dynamic kind of thing that is going to change over time. Let me point out that I have the information to manage the program. Where I didn't have the information to manage the program and to ensure that the financial integrity system was fully in place, I took special initiatives that, in fact, have never been implemented in the Department of Defense and went beyond what people in the Department of Defense have been working on, particularly where I saw this program had a special need. And that need was in the accounting system and accounting for expenditures and getting those expenditures in a much more real-time basis available to me and my managers. And in fact, Mr. Vanderschaft indicated that that initiative was unique. I went further than what the department had said they needed. And that was because I recognized very early that we have a different kind of a problem than others. Let me try to illustrate why that is an issue. In many cases, when we go out and we take a technology program and we're trying to advance materials, for example, and perhaps that contract is at the Air Force Materiel Laboratory, and they have a contract that was competitively awarded for certain materials. And what I say is that I need for you to take one of these materials, advanced composite materials, and show me how you can make a space application of that that's never been tried before. The most appropriate way, once they first examine and say that's in the scope of the present contract, is to put a change on that contract. When they put that change on that contract, they are now working my problem, and my technical managers are there and working with them to ensure that they're working my part of my problem. But what was introduced into the accounting structure was that this contract has in it work that is being funded by the Air Force under some program elements, and work that was funded through me to the Air Force for other program elements. Now, what that means is the way the expenditures on the contract are reported have to be carefully examined. And that's what I went after. I saw that as a clear shortfall, that in fact there weren't systems in place that could give me prompt information on exactly those. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, I know that in your 86 hearings, you were concerned with expenditures. As a result of our initiatives, we have moved...
More concerned now.
Yeah, well, okay, but my point is that we are moving that forward in the whole infrastructure, and we held meetings with the comptrollers of the services to try to illustrate the problem. I sent in high-level, very, very experienced consultants that were acceptable to the services. In fact, the former director of the budget of the United States Air Force, a former Brigadier General, Wilma Vaught. I sent her in to go and investigate that problem and to understand it. And what you will see is you'll see in my reporting systems, in fact, reports that nobody else gets on expenditures and on non-cancelable commitments because of my concern that we get that kind of timely information.
Well, really, in a sense, you and I are talking about two different things.
No, sir, I don't believe so.
Yes, we are, because you're talking about information that's necessary for you to put into place a particular program. And I agree 100% with what you're having to say. But what we're talking about is for you to have in your shop a management team which will responsibly comply with the law, the circular, and the directive. And to give that kind of management control, which is so important. I mean, we don't want this program, and if those things are in place, we don't want this program to come under the kind of, well, one problem would be your lack of information with regard to management, which might end up in some type of fraud or different types of problems. You might have a failure, such as they had in NASA, which could be catastrophic. You wouldn't be putting people in space and that sort of thing, but there might be some instances in which a program would fail. Perhaps the mission couldn't be realized because you hadn't checked all the things that need to be checked. There's an informational capacity that you need in order for you to accomplish your purpose, and I think we understand that. But there's also information and management which is necessary to comply with the, quote, law, circular, and directive.
Yes,
and your agency is subject to that.
That's
and
correct.
The question that we're asking here is, how are you complying, and how much time will it take you to get there? The Inspector General, who had the most up-to-date information on your agency, because I think the GAO was a little bit out of date. They're going to have to get brought up to speed, so to speak.
Yes.
But your IG says it's going to take you 5 years to get there.
I believe that comment was relative to the management information system,
understand,
not the
but the
Integrity
information,
Act, not the elements that are required for the Integrity
But
Act.
I think it's all involved in regard to to meeting the management problem, and to comply with the law and the circular and the directive.
Sir, if I can point out that there's a lot of information that is important and useful, but that is not vital to ensuring financial integrity.
That's true.
And that financial integrity is where we have put our first priority. And, in fact, where I found shortfalls in the overall DoD system, not because the DoD system doesn't have integrity, but because I had special management needs to do that, we took initiatives to correct that and to fix that. Now, in terms of other kinds of information that are nice to have, that might be helpful, we have put priorities on the things that are most helpful. Let me give you an example about, frankly, what I consider to be nonsense in this business of the information on the contracts themselves and that contract reporting system. My managers know what contracts we have. They know them very carefully. They not only analyze those contracts and work with the agents very carefully, they work on the technical meaning and how we move and how we integrate all of those. Here, this book is an example of a planned technical program, and what you will see in the back part of this book is a layout of the contract summaries, the financial issues associated with it, the schedule. That's the essence of management control and financial integrity. Now, is it important that I have the way that I can press an automatic button and get a listing of not only all of my prime contracts, but all of my subcontracts. My managers have that, and they're working with it on a daily basis. And by the way, I'd like to, this is General Select Schnelzer, just take that up to them so they can look at it, sir, please. We have that element, or we have that information. Now, that particular item, who uses that element? We have responses from Congress about how many contracts do we have and in what districts, and we want to be responsive to the Congress. The only people who have requested that information are people who then want to publish what I consider to be incorrect kind of summaries of where that information is. So I'd like to correct that. But it is not vital to the management of the program. That kind of information is there.
Just let me ask you one other question. How many people do you have in your shop? In that SDIO, how many people do you have there?
We have about 250 people at this point.
Now, how many of those people are working with regard to complying with the law, circular, and directive on this management control?
Frankly, the great majority of them are working on that. Now, in terms of dedicated people bringing forward an integrated management information system, my individuals who needed the information were given the charge to develop the management information they needed first. Then it became clear that we had some redundancy. We could do a better job if they looked across. And so we have now established, with a very few number of people, the requirement to integrate that and to provide it more efficiently.
Well, let me ask you this very succinctly. There is a law, there's a circular, and there's a directive.
Yes, sir.
Are you in full compliance?
I believe that we're in compliance with the essence of it. We have 3 material weaknesses that will be corrected within a very short period of months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. And I had a couple of questions. Have you about finished with your statement generally, what you wanted to say?
No,
Your
sir.
statement's all
We're
in
really in a response mode, and I'd like to keep that, sir.
All right. Would you explain the material weaknesses reported in the SDIO's internal management control plan?
In the internal management control system. Yes, sir. They are the 4.
They were 3.
3 that were listed. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gordon, please.
Let me see. I've got to remember them. One was that we had the management information system that was not fully in place. Could I? That's the first one, sir.
Mr. Smith, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm Gordon Smith. I'd like to report, sir, that I came from 27 years in industry to this job 2 years ago. Now, that has a bearing on this because in industry, you survive because you have to make a profit. When I came here to SDIO, it is a well-managed program, and I'm very proud to be a part of it,
Yes,
sir.
I appreciate your own dedication.
Now, sir, with regard to the internal management control, we did submit our plan in November of 1987, and we will have that plan essentially implemented by the end of this fiscal year. The management information system, however, could take a little bit longer to fully flesh out. However, let me explain to you what we've done already. We have now our work package directive system up on our mini computer so that we have in our database right now all the elements of those work package directives that are going out to the executing agents. And in fact, that is the system that we've been using all along, and it's very, very effective. Now, in 1 month's time, we shall have that interneted with our services, our executing agents, so that we shall all be able to read what is in that database. I think that that is a very, very good start to getting an integrated management information system. Now, there were 2 other material weaknesses.
Sir, and so that you can understand the seriousness of these material weaknesses or not, one was the management information system, and the requirement was, can you improve it and make it more efficient? And that's where we have a 5-year plan to include that and to make it more efficient. But there are not deficiencies of the kind that mean that we don't have the vital information to manage the program or to ensure financial integrity.
General, I know you're going to be sad. I understand Mr. Smith is going over to the Defense Department. Are you moving over to the Defense Department? Did I understand that?
No, sir.
Dr. Smith has been nominated and is for confirmation to take over the Assistant Secretary for C3I within the Department of Defense. That'll be a sorry loss for me, frankly. You asked for what were these other material deficiencies? Right. There were deficiencies in the way in which consultants have been fully accounted for and employed. And as Mr. Vanderschaft indicated, some of those deficiencies have been in getting the complete and timely filing of all of their areas, and that is a problem not only in my own organization, but more importantly in the Department of Defense, and getting those handled in a timely way. Those are not a fundamental failure of the overall program. It means that we have got to do a better job, and we will, in terms of accounting for these consultants. And what happens here is that we very often look for outside advice in order to ensure that these research programs, which are right on the very edge of technology, that we are spending our money wisely, and sometimes these consultants dedicate many more hours than we know or control, and then they bring in a report, and we have to update their timing, and we have to ensure that they are properly tracked for, and we have to improve that. The third one is the tasking and administration of management support for our contracts, which are management support contracts themselves within the SDI. Now, those management support efforts are compensating for some of our minimal manning. And yes, we do have to find better ways to do that. We are right now concluding what we call a superseda, but where we have gone out on a major recontracting competitive effort to ensure that we get the best effort there, and we are improving our management support people, the people who are dedicated to ensure that those contracts are properly led. Now, if you look at those three material deficiencies, they're real and they're something that I have to work on, but they are not fundamental violations of what I know you're interested in and I'm interested in, Mr. Chairman, and that is the integrity of the overall system and the overall program.
General, I noticed that the IG commended you on tracking non-cancelable commitments. And I wondered, what is the current cost of your non-cancelable commitments? If they close out SDI or some part of it, how much do we have to pay, regardless, for the closeout cost? Non-cancelable cost that we are hung with.
Yes.
What's our exposure?
I'll have to supply that for the record, sir, because I have to go in and add up that report, which is available on each one of our contracts. Yes, sir.
All right. And how many people at the SDI are currently working?
By the way, non-cancelable commitments are a little different than termination liabilities, sir.
Well, you might give us both.
Sir, the Department of Defense does not have an adequate way, in fact, nobody does, and I'm a manager, I've been in this business a long time, and they do not have good ways in which we can maintain an estimate at all times of what termination liability is, an accurate estimate.
It's always a horror.
I can give you what I'm trying to correct, non-cancelable
They figure it out when it
commitments.
happens, though. And they're always bigger numbers than anybody ever dreamed. Well, give us a non-cancelable commitment.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just on that subject, would you, During the course of the time that you've been in existence, the SDIO, there have been some that have been canceled.
Yes, there have been.
And so you can give us the defined costs that are involved with those, could you not?
Yes, sir.
In other words, perspective, I mean,
Yes, sir.
I can understand, and you certainly wouldn't know what that is. But
Yes, sir.
you could give us what has actually been charged to you because of cancellation.
What has been charged, recognize that there are some that have been terminated for good and valid reasons,
Yeah.
by the way, and it represents where we've had less money and we've had to terminate the ones that are less promising. And some of those are still in negotiation. I can give you the information that is the clearly paid out, and I can give you our best estimate of the ones which are in negotiation at this point.
That's good. Thanks.
I have a couple other questions I'll submit for the record without objection. And Mr. Conyers, the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Chairman, I've listened to this conversation with great interest. I wasn't present in your earlier hearings on this subject. But it seems to me that that there has been some agreement between SDIO and GAO on the problems here, and that there was a concurrence with all the recommendations. Is that correct, General Abramson?
In terms of the specific points, at the time that report was first worked on, the answer is yes. In terms of some of the implications that were drawn in this hearing and at this table today, absolutely not.
Well, I'm talking about the recommendations that were concurred in with your organization and GAO.
Yes. If you're referring, for example, the
I'm referring
contract...
to all of them.
Yes, sir.
So we're in agreement there. The fact of our disagreement seems to be that you're not willing to agree that this contract reporting weaknesses may be linked to the need to implement a formal internal management control program. In other words, what you're doing is separating them. Let me read this one sentence here. Although SDIO stated that its contract reporting system is not a management tool, it appears that contract reporting weaknesses may be linked to a more broader concern, which is SDIO's need to implement a formal internal management control program. Now, as I interpret the discussion coming from you at the witness table, you're resisting that linkage there. And if we all agree that the recommendations the GAO found are good and valid, that they're the faults, and that the recommendations to correct the faults were agreed to, it seems to me that this is a rather small difference that we have in terms of all of the back and forth about contract data, because if you can't tell us who's contracting with you, and you know that we're an oversight committee to the Congress, we're in bad shape. I mean,
Sir, I can't tell you
I don't
that.
think that's a small set of potatoes there. I think that's pretty large business. The reason I say so is because this committee has uncovered more waste, more fraud, more inefficiencies than any other committee in the Congress, probably including the other body. So what we're prevented from doing is to understanding the types of contractors, the extent of competition. All of that now has a veil dropped between us and you.
No.
Oh, yes. Well, the reason I say yes isn't because I've gone over to your shop to find out if it's true or not. I say yes because GAO said so, and you concurred in the ways to correct it. That's the only thing that I have to go on this morning.
Well, let me be very specific on that contract reporting issue. I can identify for you very quickly and very easily all of our prime contracts. I can identify for you all of the type of contract, who they're with. That's available. That's very simple and very straightforward. I can go well beyond that. My people can identify for you the status of those contracts, whether there's danger of an overrun, whether there's a problem in the accounting structure. We can do all of that. What we can't do at this point is that we can't identify all of the subcontracts down to $25,000 that would be useful, and I first tried to go out and say, prime contractors, why don't you give us a special report to do that? And that's a changing base at all times. And that would have been a redundant requirement over and above the reporting requirements we presently have. And as I indicate, frankly, of not a great deal of value to us. The easiest way to solve that problem is the way we're engaged in it, and that is to get a special SDI designator on a report that is already submitted and made available. And that's what we're doing. That's the easy way to solve that problem.
Well, if this is a throwaway item, then GAO has been misleading us, and I don't think that they have been. Here's a sentence on GAO page 2. We found that the types of contractors that received contract awards totaling about $4.5 billion, or 98% of the obligated funds, were not identified.
In
we
that
also
one
found
central system at the time.
Well, right.
That's been corrected. I have all those prime contractors.
We also found that the extent of competition was not identified for contract awards totaling about $1.7 billion, or 37% of the obligated funds. Now, they go on to say recently taken action, SDIO has recently taken action to more completely identify the SDI funded contract awards. But what we still have is a system of reporting that makes it difficult for us to oversight. Now, what you're saying here, General Abramson, as I hear it, and your explanations are very detailed, and they reflect the experience that you have spent in management. But you're saying to the Oversight Committee, trust me.
No, I'm not.
Oh, well, that's what I hear, because GAO says that they can't identify them. We know that steps have been taken to change that. But we all meet here today agreeing that there were these faults and that there were improvements that were agreed to in the form of recommendations. And so I don't think that we can throw this away as something that's not important or small fish. There's no way that we can go over there and do this if GAO can't. I mean, we just don't have the capacity. It would take us in government operations a special team, and to halt everything else that we were oversighting in government just to find out what SDIO is doing in their contract reporting system. And I don't think that's a fair burden that you would want to impose on us, even if we could somehow get up to task, up to speed to handle that.
Yeah,
so
sir,
if it is true,
that's correct.
If it is true that we've had these problems, and by the way, this is the second report on this subject.
Yes.
You know, we're not coming at this the first time. This is the second slice on essentially, as I have been given to understand it, the same subject matter. So what we're trying to do is not to denigrate the work that you're doing, but to say that if you agreed with GAO on the items that they found that were out of sync, have agreed with the recommendations, some of which have been acted on, it seems to me that the GAO report is correct. Now, I can't tell you about any inferences that you may have not agreed with since you've been in this hearing room today. But the members of the committee have to draw their own conclusions. We have to interpret what you're telling us, what your IG is telling us, with what the GAO has reported, and there hasn't been a great deal of disagreement, from my understanding, about this. So I think that what we're all here at this point agreed to is that there's got to still be a continuing oversight by this subcommittee, because this is the second time that we've run up against this problem of this unaccountability in contractual awards. We are understanding that it's being changed, that it's being improved, but so far we're not there yet. That's what GAO said. I think that's what your own IG said, and I think that that's more than enough reason for us to gather this morning, and more than enough reason for us to look down the road, certainly in some part of next year, to see where we are.
If the gentleman yield, I just want to add to that, and I think it's important to underscore that what we're talking about is not what the SDIO has been doing under your leadership, because I would certainly commend you on your on what your managers have been able to accomplish in SDI. I mean, I think it's been one of the major accomplishments in the last few years as this country has progressed. And Mr. Brooks and I were out at the North Atlantic Assembly in San Francisco. You were out along with Secretary of State Schultz, and North Atlantic Assembly parliamentarians from the NATO countries adopted a resolution, in essence, moving forward with the SDI research. So much is owed to you in your leadership capacity in accomplishing what has been accomplished to date in that program. But I think what we're trying to get across is that there is a law, a circular, and a directive that does require management controls, and that there's a purpose for that. And we've had an opportunity to talk about that today. And your agency has a ways to go yet before it gets there. And I think all we're trying to do is charge you with that responsibility of moving forward as quickly as you can to get there. And it has meaning, it has a purpose, because it will be helpful to you. It's a helpful tool. A lot of people don't understand management is a very important tool. And I think you do understand that, and I think you agree with us that your agency does have the responsibility of achieving this goal as quickly as possible, so that that you can comply fully with the law, circular, and the directive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Conyers. And I just add that I was very glad to help you at NATO, and I did.
Sir,
it didn't mean that I expected y'all to come back and not use every possible means of making it up to snuff and keeping it that way. You know, just a little in-house discussion like this, is I don't want to be embarrassed. I told them you were the greatest things in Scotch tape, and you damn sure better be. You understand? That's my attitude, and I see a few flaws in that tape. I also have one little comment. I wrote you a letter on January the 27th of this year. And I don't believe we've got an answer back. And so the questions in that about barring Strategic Defense Initiative contracts to foreign firms, unless certain conditions are met. You all heard of that over there? Any of the staff heard of it? I'll give you another copy of the letter in case you want one.
Sir, let me check immediately and find out what it is.
I'll give you this copy.
Yes, sir.
They got 5 or 6 questions in there. I wish you'd answer them. For the record, they're important
here.
Yes, sir,
I will.
And I want to thank you very much for give that to them so they have it in case they might have lost that letter. And I want to thank you very much for your testimony, both of you, and wish you every success in your new venture. Hopefully you'll get... I don't know, they're going to confirm anybody else over in the Senate?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman.
I will probably be the last one in this administration.
You're going to be the last bird out of the chute, huh?
I hope to have that confirmation hearing soon after the Easter recess.
It may be like some of those plans.
Okay.
It's underway and we've got a committee studying it. Now, the testimony we've heard today raises some concern about adequate management of what potentially could be the largest defense program of all time. And the challenge of effective management of SDI may be as formidable as its mission. As an oversight committee, we must be concerned with any departure from laws and regulations established to assure adequate financial and management integrity of federal agencies. We're not pleased that a formal internal management control program is just now being implemented 5 years after the intention was announced to pursue what everybody knew would be a multi-billion-dollar initiative, and 4 years after the Strategic Defense Organization was established. The Department of Defense apparent message to us is fear not, we got a plan. It may not be perfect, but it's got the essence of everything in it, and it's coming on great. But you've already had about $12 billion without such a plan being in place. So I'm beginning to get nervous about putting up any more money. And nevertheless, SDI will remain, with this situation, a highly controversial, expensive effort. So I think it's essential that Congress continue to review the management aspect of the SDI program, which has received scant attention in the past. A result of this hearing will hopefully be more attention in the future to this important part of SDI. You can be assured we will continue our own oversight of the program, and I want to thank all the witnesses, and the hearing is adjourned. Pardon me, Mr.
Before we
Conyers,
go
the
to
gentleman from
closure,
Michigan.
do you have a listing of the minority contractors that have been involved with SDI? I mean, are you able to make that kind of a breakout?
We can provide that, sir.
Yes, sir, we can.
We can
Could you
provide
provide that for the committee?
Yes,
We can do that from the ones that we have awarded at my level, plus the ones that have been awarded as prime awards out throughout the system. There is some difficulty, as always, and by the way, this is an inherent difficulty in the Department of Defense kind of activity, reporting the contractors who then, in sometimes second and third tier awards, go out to minority contracts and contractors. That is an area that it's not always reported as accurately as it should.
Well,
but I can give you all of those prime efforts.
Well, we have the Assistant Secretary of Defense, who's been very eager to have prime contractors live up to their responsibility in awards to minority subcontractors, and unless it's reported, then nobody gets any credit for it. So I'd be very interested in that dimension of it, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, General.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and the subcommittee is adjourned.
Major events that air on C-SPAN are previewed in the C-SPAN Update, the network's weekly newspaper. The update gives you the big picture on the week through reports